A sharp snap of static broke the late-night infomercial, and Jenna's dog barked once, then nothing answered the sound. Fear tightened Jenna's hands around the frayed leash. She had held that leash every morning for 3 years. She stepped into the living room and saw only the rug depress where Milo had been, a faint warped waveform pulsing on the air above the floor like a heat shimmer. Jenna moved fast. She checked under the couch with her flashlight and peered into the hallway closet. Her voice came out clipped when she called, "Milo." Jenna's breath hitched. The memory of her voice calling him through rain last winter, they had both run for shelter, came back in exact detail and pushed her feet forward. Fear drove her actions. She would not stand still while something she loved vanished. She shoved the front door open. The hallway lights stuttered and hummed. In the stairwell, a neighbor shouted from below. Jenna called, "Marco's." She ran down 3 steps at a time and nearly collided with him at the landing. "Jenna, Marco's." He was holding a cigarette halfway to his mouth. "What happened?" "I heard yelling. Milo's gone, Jenna." Her voice was thin. "He barked and then he was just gone." Jenna held the leash out like evidence. Marco's dropped the cigarette into the stair tread with a curse and followed her outside. The sidewalk smelled of wet asphalt and cleaning detergent. They moved toward the curb where tire tracks cut through a burned patch of pavement 3 doors down. Dark smudges rimmed the patch. A second leash lay on the ground like a discarded rope, the handle frayed at the loop. "This is wrong, Marco's." He crouched and ran fingers along the leash fibers. "This looks like it's been pulled hard." Jenna touched the leash and found salt on the cord and a bit of dried plant resin. She swallowed. Her mouth tasted of metal and coffee. "We have to call someone." Her voice hitched when she said the words. Fear wanted her to flee. Jenna kept moving instead. At the same time, 30 blocks away in a neon-lit control room, a low wall of monitors showed the broadcast feed that had split the city's channels. The station operator labeled Dobe 7 watched one monitor with a slow, methodical gaze. On the main screen, the waveform that Jenna had seen rose and sank in a pattern that did not match any licensed signal. The operator's hands hovered over a rotary switch. He spoke into a microphone clipped to his headset with the flat, procedural cadence of someone trained to treat panic as a variable. "Control to dispatcher. Playback sequence 9-8. Repeat, flagged waveform detected on channel 3-9, the operator." His voice carried the exact calm Jenna would hear later through the thin speakers in her apartment. But for now she was still outside, moving with Marco's toward the burned patch. Marco's had a flashlight clipped to his key ring. He trained it on the ground and pointed out a set of shallow prints leading away from the patch, and then stopping at a point where the asphalt crusted like it had been singed. A single imprint in the dust looked like a dog's paw, the pads smeared with a gray residue. Jenna put a hand to her mouth and tasted the same metallic note she had tasted earlier. "We need to look around the block, Jenna." She did not sound like she was asking. Fear had become push. Marco stood and said, "I'll go that way." "You check the building." He walked off in the direction of the alley between 2 row houses. Jenna turned back toward her building. Her apartment door was ajar when she reached it. The chain was undone. Her feet made quick, muffled sounds on the stair. Inside, the air smelled of wet fur and detergent. The living room lamp hummed. On the plaster by the door, someone had sketched a shapeless symbol in pencil, and then traced it again in a darker lead. There were 3 loops and a short diagonal cut through the center. The pattern matched none of the graffiti she knew. Jenna called, "Marco's." Her words were measured. She noticed that speaking out loud steadied her. She moved toward the sofa and stopped when a faint audio artifact hovered in the air, the same slow pulse that had hovered at the site where Milo had been. The pulse resolved into a whisper layered with reversed syllables. Jenna crouched and placed her palm over the numb spot on the rug. Her fingers met no fur. She rose, breath shallow, and reached for her phone. Her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number labeled "Control. Do not adjust your hearing. Continue to monitor channel." The text field flickered as if rewritten. Jenna read it twice. She tapped the reply button and typed, "Who is this?" Her thumbs trembled. Across the street, Marco's found a short line of scuff marks leading to a patch of dirt where the grass had been singed into black. He called Jenna and she answered from the doorway. "Marco's, listen to me. There's a message on my phone." It says not to adjust hearing, she swallowed. Marco squinted at his phone screen. That doesn't make sense. Jenna, that sounds like one of those hoax alerts. Don't say it's a hoax. Jenna snapped. Not while a dog disappears, they argued in quick, clipped lines. Jenna's voice rose in short bursts and Marcos's voice came back blunt and pragmatic. Jenna, we call the police. Don't wander off. Marcos, the leash. Jenna. She tried to explain the residue and the symbol on her wall, but each phrase felt small when the other person kept trying to be practical. The argument stopped when the building intercom hissed, and then gave a thin, institutional tone. Distant through the speaker came the station operator's voice. This is a safety override. Repeat. Do not adjust auditory input. Follow local containment directives until further notice. The message carried with the flat authority of a recorded advisory. Jenna's fingers clenched on the stair rail. The voice had the same rhythm she had once heard at a hospital when machines announced shift changes. For the first time, her fears shifted into compliance, she thought. Obeying might keep her alive. The word compliance lodged like a lever. Marcos, he do not adjust hearing. We stay put. Marcos's jaw worked. We stay where? Outside. Which one keeps someone from vanishing? He took a breath and then said, all right, inside. Jenna, stay inside. Lock the door. Jenna locked the deadbolt and pushed the chain through. Her hands were shaking so mildly that she felt it only when she touched the metal. She sat on the sofa and pressed the leash into her lap. The pulsing artifact in the air sounded like a faint fan with a warped rhythm. She put the leash in front of her like a shield. The station operator in the control room fed an archival clip into the main monitor. He watched the earlier footage of a different neighborhood where a similar waveform had preceded a disappearance. The playback showed a woman hunched on her floor while a small terrier barked at something outside the window. The terrier stopped mid-bark. The woman reached for the leash. Then the feed cut to static. Dulb 7 adjusted a knob and annotated the file. He spoke into his log. Case 9 documented. Auditory anomaly precedes vanishing. Compliance correlated with survival in 42% of samples. Further analysis required. Inside Jenna's apartment, the reversed syllables shifted into a looped phrase that sounded like a name. Jenna heard it and did not recognize it. The signal layered a female whisper over the reversed syllables and then folded both into a low beat that matched the pulse of the radiator. Jenna put hands over her ears because it felt instinctive to block the noise. But the message on her phone and the operator's voice told her not to adjust her hearing. She removed her hands again and breathed through it. The second emotion shift came as resistance turned into a brittle acceptance. She stood and walked to the apartment window. The street lamps pooled light like slow coins. Marcos appeared outside in the hallowed light of the stairwell camera. He raised both hands to show calm. Jenna mouthed, okay, and mouthed the instruction she had just read. Do not adjust hearing. She did not know whether the instruction was a test or a trap. 3 paragraphs later in the control room, the dispatcher called Dulb 7 directly and used 3 quick lines. Call sign Blake here. We've had 2 missing reports within a 10-block radius. 1 canine, 1 male adult. The witnesses report a pulsing sound. We need coordinates. Dulb 7 ran his finger along a schematic map, eyes steady. He replied with exact measured commands and without visible emotion. Dispatch units to grid 7. Advised to maintain auditory exposure as per emergent directive. Repeat. Do not obstruct perception. Jenna listened from her window and heard the distant muffled exchange. The operator's instruction created a new internal pressure. Follow or refuse. She placed her palm flat against the glass and felt the cold. She thought of Milo's weight when he leaned into her thigh for comfort. She remembered training him to heel at crosswalks and the small, reliable thump of his tail when she came home late. The memory supplied one concrete, immediate motivation. Protect him. Her decision formed as an action. Jenna strapped the leash to her belt loop and opened the door just enough to let a sliver of night air in. She whispered, I have to check the alley. Marcos's voice came back tight and urgent. Jenna, you can't. Lock the door. They clashed again, and this argument moved quickly into a short, raw exchange of lines. Marcos, Milo could be hurt. Jenna, people go missing when they ignore the operator. Marcos replied, then call them. Jenna, I'm calling Marcos. He dialed as he said it. The dispatcher answered with a clipped voice. Dispatcher here. We received an override. Can you confirm containment at your site? Marcos gave coordinates and described the burned patch. If units were en route, the dispatcher only to await instruction. Do not alter auditory input, the line clicked. Jenna moved down the stair with a flaring sense of duty that had replaced fear with a new blend of hope and nervous determination. She stepped into the alley and found the fur pattern on the brick where Milo used to rest his head when he waited for her to return. The signal intruded again, pressing a quick set of reversed consonants into her skull. This time Jenna felt a tug in her limbs. Her right foot started to move toward the back lot where a service door gaped. She stopped. She counted to 3 out loud. Her voice was steady, words clipped. 1, 2, 3. The counting worked like a physical talisman. At that exact moment, an external event occurred. A patrol unit's headlights swung into the alley and illuminated a narrow figure. Marco shouted, "Stop!" The figure looked like a person at first, but as the light caught the outline, it dissolved into a smear of static that asked away and vanished into a storm drain. A single cigarette butt rolled into the gutter and stopped. Marcos ran forward and leaned over where the figure had been. His fingers closed on nothing. He looked up at Jenna and the rawness in his voice was immediate. Where did it go? Jenna felt the second mini cliffhanger. The figure's disappearance changed the stakes. She smelled ozone and a metallic tang. The signal's pull had attempted to move her forward. She gripped the leash until her knuckles whitened. Her fear shifted again. It became a focused, gritty resolve. She wanted the concrete fact of where Milo had gone more than she wanted comfort. Back in the control room, Delb 7 toggled a waveform overlay and noticed irregular carrier modulation that suggested the anomaly was not random noise but an algorithmic pattern. He spoke into his log, noting a pattern match with the archived file. He ordered a relay to a higher band and flagged the file for immediate procedural review. The dispatcher sent an annotated playback to local units. Delb 7 then issued a directive: remove external speakers from public areas. The directive read cold on the screen: limit communal loudspeakers, preserve individual auditory channels. He did not explain on air. Jenna and Marcos moved in pairs. They checked the alleyway drainage, the low wooden shed, and a delivery corridor. They found a burned patch under a rear skylight and a thin film of resin on the concrete. Jenna knelt and picked at the residue. She smelled burnt plastic. She allowed. It was here. Her voice snapped like a rubber band. Marcos peered into the skylight and then at Jenna. Jenna, listen. I can hear something through the grate. He lowered his head and spoke with quick, clipped words. It sounds like a voice but reversed. Jenna leaned in and heard it too. The signal had layered syllables into a low, vocal churn that proposed a name. Jenna whispered, "Don't say the name." Her hands trembled. Marcos froze. "What name?" he asked. He bent down and then sharply stood. "Oh, Jenna, there's a second leash. It's looped around this pipe as if someone prepared it." Jenna's breath shortened. She grabbed the leash and found the handle warm as if it had been held moments before. The signal pressed a whisper to the edge of her hearing that sounded like a command. Jenna felt her legs begin to move toward the skylight again. She halted herself with a sharp, physical movement. She tossed the leash into the alley and stepped back hard, as if knocking the compulsion away. The small, physical act cut the signal's thread for a moment. They stayed silent for a long counted minute. Then patrol radios cracked and a voice asked for a status update. Marcos answered with blunt, fast sentences. "Deck cleared. 2 possible leads. There's residue and a staged leash." One witness reports a pulsing in the air. The patrolman asked, "Any sign of a person?" Marcos, "No. Just the leash and the mark." One of the patrol officers turned to Jenna. "Madam, did you see anything?" Jenna swallowed and said, "He barked and then he wasn't there." The officer's face was blank in the halo of the patrol light. "We'll log a missing report and forward to Central. Stay inside and monitor your channel." He handed Jenna a card with the case number. Back in the control room, the operator watched the log and noted that archival data showed the pattern of compliance reduced entropic displacement, but sometimes traded it for the disappearance of an accompanying person. The operator tightened his jaw and annotated. Compliance reduces immediate displacement in 50% of cases but correlates with secondary losses in neighboring individuals. Continue monitoring. That annotation became the twist. Compliance might save the hero but cost someone else. Jenna learned of that possibility only later when the dispatcher whispered in a closed channel to one unit. Marcos had been present when the dispatcher any movement from the alley. The dispatcher hesitated and then said, "One missing male reported by witness. Keep coordinates. Move with caution." The phrasing suggested that the unit should avoid a rescue that might breach auditory exposure. Jenna felt the ground tilt. She had complied, and yet there had been a vanishing. She shifted from acceptance into a brittle distrust. Her hands went cold. Marcos, where's the dispatcher number? Marcos gave it to her and she dialed with short, direct keystrokes. The dispatcher answered, "Requester." "Jenna, why did you tell us not to adjust hearing if that makes other people disappear?" She tried to keep her voice steady. The dispatcher replied in clipped, formal lines, "Madam, we issued a citywide containment directive. Do not adjust auditory input reduces immediate displacement probability for those who comply. It also shows secondary effect patterns that are under review. Please remain in place until higher command issues further instruction." The dispatcher ended with, "We cannot provide further comment at this time." The line clicked. Jenna had one concrete fact. Compliance might help her survive but might put others at risk. She looked at Marcos and saw the confusion on his face shift to anger. They argued in 3 rapid exchanges about what to do. "We can't just let people vanish because we listen, Marcos, and we can't risk Milo, Jenna." "Then we risk both," Marcos shot back. At dawn, the neighborhood looked thin and exhausted. The patrols had more cars and fewer officers. Jenna sat on the stoop with the leash in her lap. She had followed the directive to keep her hearing unobstructed, and it had kept the immediate compulsion at bay, but the cost had shown on the street. Marcos was missing. The patrol officer gave her a terse update that the missing man report had been filed and that the unit had sighted a smear of static at the edge of a storm drain but no body. "We take notes and escalate," he said. Inside the control room, Dulb 7 played the damaged ident back and watched the waveform fold. He logged Jenna's survival as a data point and flagged Marcos as an unaccounted variable. He added a notation to the file, "Event escalates pattern. Recommend issuing amended containment. Local responders to act under Directive 2. Prioritize auditory preservation for civilian witnesses. Consider tactical decoupling for retrieval teams." He sent the directive into the network as a terse line of code. Jenna watched the operator's pale face on a wall, mounted public monitor as a grainy patch of his recorded face cycled through the station ident. The broadcast looped its advisory for a minute, then fell into a damaged ident, and the looping static tone swallowed the room. The operator's last visible words before the cut were procedural and clipped. "Await further instruction. Do not tune out." Then the feed collapsed into a cracked logo and the static filled the channel. Jenna closed her hand around the leash and felt the loop cut into her palm. She heard the pulsing artifact one last time, muted now by daylight and the thrum of distant traffic. Her fear had become a precise action-driven caution. She rose and marched up the stairs to her apartment, opened the door, and found a fresh mark on the plaster where someone had drawn another symbol with a steady hand. She bent and traced the line with her fingertip. The signal's waveform floated in the air above the rug like a thin, visible breath. She set the leash on the table, folded the patrol card in half, and slid it into her pocket. The control feed returned a damaged ident and a looping advisory promising updates. The operator's log timestamped her survival and noted an expanding pattern. Jenna read the notes on her phone, numbers, coordinates, a suggestion to monitor the channel. She put the phone face down and pressed both palms to her temples to steady herself. Then there was a knock at the door. Jenna started and then moved to answer it. She opened the door a fraction. A patrol sergeant stood there with a thin envelope. "Jenna Morales, we need your statement. And there's a containment addendum you'll need to sign." Jenna took the envelope with a hand that did not tremble. She read the first 2 lines inside. Case number, directives to preserve auditory exposure. Her mouth tasted like the metallic tang she'd felt since the first bark. She nodded once at the sergeant and closed the door. The feed on her phone went black and the looping static returned. The operator's last logged line on the public channel repeated the directive in a cracked voice. "Monitor frequency. Await further instructions. Do not tune out." The feed collapsed into a looping static tone and a cracked station ident before the line went dead. Jenna sat on the sofa with the leash in her lap, and the symbol traced faintly on the plaster above the table. Fear had led her to obey, to test the edge of the signal, and to survive a night that cost a neighbor. Her choice had produced a record and a question. Which pattern would the next broadcast demand she follow? The loudspeaker cut into the late night music and snapped a single instruction across every aisle. Keep devices live. A dog fell at Jenna Morles's feet, legs folding under him, and Jenna lunged, hands on a damp collar, breath burning. Fear tightened Jenna's fingers on the frayed leash. Fear that had been waiting since the snap of static 3 nights earlier when Milo vanished and left only a depression on the rug. Jenna did not wait for anyone to tell her what to do. She scooped the dog up and scanned faces in the fluorescent glare. People moved away from the collapsed animal. A man in a maintenance jacket held his phone above his head and looked at Jenna. "What do we do?" he asked. Jenna set the dog down on the vinyl floor, tried to feel a pulse, found a slow thud. Keep your phones on. Don't turn anything off." The line left her mouth before she processed why she had said it. The loudspeaker repeated the order, terse and dry. The same clipped cadence cut into the building again. Jenna heard the directive and felt something like obedience and something like doubt shift under her ribs. Jenna kept one hand on the dog's throat and the other on the leash while Marcus, the neighbor who had come with her, crouched. "Jenna, Marcus, this isn't Milo." "I know," she said, "but listen to the voice." "That is not a customer message." Marcus jabbed a thumb toward the ceiling speakers. "It says stay live. It's telling us not to mute." Jenna's mouth went thin. She remembered the snap of static from the infomercial 3 nights before, the rug depression at home where Milo had once stood. That memory came not as a thought but as a recorded detail. The worn loop of the leash across her palm, the exact way the rug fibers bent. The dog on the floor began to twitch. A soft reverse hiss leaked from somewhere in the store, a sound like a cassette being rewound. Rainer, a radio technician Jenna had called earlier that week, pushed through the sliding doors with a toolbox. She knelt and flipped open the collar. "It's got a cheap transmitter sewn near the tag," she said. "Someone taped something onto it." Jenna felt suspicion sharpen into anger. "Who would do that?" she demanded. "What is it playing?" Rainer tapped the small device and held it to her ear. She frowned and said, "There's a loop. It sounds like a bark reversed and cut into a pattern." The device hummed under her fingers with a geometry Jenna could not place. A store manager in a reflective vest moved people toward the exits. "Please leave calmly," he told a cluster of late shoppers. He did not look at Jenna. The loudspeaker cut in again. "Do not sever power. Keep devices open." Await instruction. Officer Cortez arrived in a patrol jacket and stepped under the PI array, lifting his chin. "Turn it off." Cortez to the manager. "Cut the power." "Cut the line." The manager shook his head. "The system's locked to an override. We can't touch it from here." Cortez's jaw tightened. "Then we pull the main breaker outside." Now he moved toward the loading bay. Station operator Delb. Seven materialized on a short-range channel. Voice flat and measured field units. "This is Delb 7. Maintain containment protocol. Do not power down public address systems. Do not mute devices. Repeat. Devices must remain live unless otherwise ordered." Cortez barked. "Delb 7. This PI is pulling people into a hazard. I have a dog unconscious and a device taped to its collar. We're cutting external power." The operator's voice went colder by tone. "Negative, Officer Cortez. Cutting power creates discontinuities. Do not sever. Keep civilians clear and await instructions from Broadcast Hub." Cortez's reply clipped. "We're not waiting to see what this thing does to kids and pets." The line went thin with static. Jenna watched Cortez argue with the broadcast like a live wire. Her suspicion had shifted into a second wave, confusion. She had obeyed earlier directives because obeying had seemed to buy time. In the archives Delb 7 had referenced, people complied and lived, but names had vanished later. Compliance had protected bodies and delivered empty spaces. Now Jenna felt confusion ground into resolve. She moved toward the loading bay where officers argued by a fuse box. "Jenna, come back." "Marcus." He reached for her sleeve. She shook him off. "I have to know whether it's Milo or not," she said. "I have to know if this sound is trying to make me go where it wants." Marcus kept both hands raised. Rena stepped up beside Jenna and said, "Let me record the collar." I can get a read on the waveform. Reiner's voice had a precise, technical cadence that calmed and prodded at once. If it's geometry, she said, we can map it. If it's intentional, it will show patterning. Jenna handed over the collar and watched Reiner plug a small analyzer into the transmitter. The analyzer's needle fluttered, then settled on a repeating jagged rhythm. Reverse, play fragments. Reiner, play that snippet back. She hit a key. The loop returned, this time with the bark stitched into a repeating geometric sequence. Jenna felt an odd clarity. The sound was not random. It had been arranged. It sounds like a call, Reiner, but inverted, folded into a rhythm that targets attention. Jenna's fear deepened into alarm. The fear that had been a thin wire now tightened into a focused ache. She pressed the memory of Milo's leash against the palm of her hand and tasted iron. Cortez argued over the radio again. Delb 7, I'm seeing people pass out. I will not sit by while this thing lures them. Delb 7's voice responded with an institutional pause. Field units. You may observe decreased immediate casualties under current containment. Long-term disappearances increase if protocols are interrupted. Recommend continued device activity and civilian isolation at safe distance. Cortez, that recommendation is an abstraction. I have people here who are collapsing, Dobe 7 replied. Containment minimizes external detection vectors. Proceed with quarantine. Await remediation window, Cortez cursed and cut his mic. Jenna kept her voice low when she spoke to Cortez. Officer Cortez, the operator says leave devices on. You cut power, which is it? Cortez looked at her, and the set of his mouth changed to something like exhaustion. Jenna, I have to protect people now, not later, he said. This voice is telling us to let it speak. That's not how we handle hazardous broadcasts. Jenna recognized the quick, heated rhythm in his voice. Impatience moving into anger. Her own voice tightened. My Milo is missing, she said. If there's any chance this is related, I have to follow it. Cortez's jaw ticked. Then you keep close to me. You do not go alone, Jenna nodded, and for the first time in hours she let someone else make a rule. An announcement came through the power with a level of polish that made the hairs on Jenna's forearm bristle. The voice did not sound wholly human. It carried a phase-cancelled hush under the words, do not sever. Do not mute. Report anomalies to frequency 319. Keep devices active. Await instruction. The words were procedural, like a policy read in a monotone, but the pauses and micro, glitches between syllables pulled at attention like a hand. People obeyed. Several shoppers sat down on the floor and opened their phones like talismans. Reiner recorded the loop and pushed a flash drive into her pocket. I'll take this back to the shop and run it through a spectral mapping program, she said. There are symbols in the waveform when you expand the frequency. Not words, but angles that repeat. Jenna's doubt shifted into curiosity. What do those angles mean? Reiner did not answer immediately. She rubbed the bridge of her nose and said, sometimes patterns like this are designed to focus a listener's attention on a particular cadence. Other times they are markers for playback devices, like a routing address embedded in sound. Jenna tried to picture an address made of sound and failed. She felt the urge to follow any direction that might lead her to Milo. Outside, the mobile command van hummed with its own generator. Cortez forced technicians to run manual diagnostics. A field technician named Perez muttered, we can rip the feed from the network at the head node, but the override is attached to a remote key. Someone suited into this environment deliberately. Cortez, find the origin. Find who put it on the dog and why. Delb 7's voice came thin and patient. Field units, prioritize civilian safety. Gather devices, keep public access points active. Log timestamps. Reiner and Jenna watched Cortez pace. He can't force me to obey that voice. Jenna, he can try to keep the crowd safe. Cortez snapped. And I can try to keep you alive. The exchange left a bitter aftertaste. Back at Jenna's apartment later, she found Milo's collar draped over the couch where he used to sleep. The ribbon was scorched in one spot, and a smear of chalk sat on the floorboards near the baseboard. Jenna crouched and traced the chalk line with a fingertip. The mark was not random. It formed 3 sharp angles arranged in the same spacing Reiner had shown her on the analyzer. Jenna's suspicion flipped into dread. She rubbed the chalk between 2 fingers and the powder left a fine red stain. She swallowed and thought of how the power had instructed people to remain obedient. She thought of the archived transmissions Dulb 7 had hinted at cases where compliance preserved bodies but allowed empty places to persist. Station operator Delb 7 allowed a longer pause on the channel and then said, "Jenna Morales, we have cross-referenced archived incidents. Compliance yielded fewer immediate casualties. Secondary metrics indicate increased unresolved disappearances when directives were severed. We maintain current containment until remediation windows open." Jenna pressed her thumb into the chalk smear until a crescent of red stood on her skin. "You telling me compliance will make people vanish over time?" Dob 7 answered. "Compliance reduces detection. Intervention increases immediate risk. This is procedural trade-off." Jenna felt a new emotion, betrayal. She had trusted institutions before, and now the institutional voice asked for obedience while revealing an outcome she did not want to accept. The betrayal sharpened into a decision, a distorted playback of Milo's bark cut from a nearby alley like an echo on a loop. The sound was wrong, rolled backwards at the tail and punctuated by a tiny metallic ring. Neighbors gathered at the mouth of the alley and stood in a loose circle. Marcus nudged Jenna. "That is Milo's cadence," he said. "I know it. I walked him at dawn." "It's Milo." Jenna stepped toward the sound and felt Cortez's hand on her shoulder. "Do not go alone," he said. "Jenna, don't." Jenna's voice was low. "I have to know whether that is Milo. I can't leave him to a playback." Cortez tightened his grip and said, "Then you go with us. You stay with the team. You don't split off." Jenna felt resolve climb into action. She nodded and moved forward with Rena and Marcus at her side. At the alley mouth, Rena swept the air with a handheld recorder. "It's layered," she said. "There's a primary bark and then 3 secondary beats underneath it that line up with the chalk mark you found." Jenna turned to Marcus. "Do you see that?" Marcus lowered his head. "I see it. I hear it. I feel like it's pulling me toward the far end." Jenna could feel an almost physical tug behind her teeth, like the sound wanted her to turn. Her breathing shortened. The emotion that had been betrayal rounded into purpose. She would follow the sound only far enough to see what it did. They moved in a small group down the alley, flashlights cutting clean beams over wet brick. Every 3 steps the playback squealed and looped, and the ground under their shoes felt normal: pavement, wet leaves, a lost grocery bag, until they reached a rusted playground gate. The playback jumped into a fuller field there, and the world around the gate seemed to carry the loop as if the metal framed the sound. Jenna stepped inside the playground. The swing chains creaked without wind. The signal condensed into a visible distortion above the seesaw, a wavering band of static that caught light and threw it back warped. Dulb 7's voice crackled on the tactical channel. "Stand down. Jenna, do not approach the source. Do not attempt to interfere with active waveform." Jenna's feet stayed planted. Rena raised her recorder and said, "If we trace back the field, we can map its node." "We could isolate it," Cortez's voice hissed through. "If you isolate it, you risk fracturing the field. If you fracture it, people at range disappear more quickly." The operator's instructions collided with the technician's instincts. Jenna looked at the wavering band above the seesaw and felt the last of her doubt collapse in on itself. She stepped forward. "Jenna, no." "Marcus." He lunged and grabbed her sleeve. They traded 3 quick lines in the space of a single motion. "Marcus, let go." "Jenna, don't." "Marcus." "Rena, help her." Reina's hands moved to the recorder's knobs. The argument cut into commands and pleas. Jenna shook Marcus free and walked under the band of distortion. It smelled like ozone and hot metal. The signal phased and then mirrored her breath, compressing the exhale into a small, rhythmic static pulse. Jenna could feel sound pressing at her molars. Her hands trembled, but she kept stride. The band of static extended fingers of noise that wrapped around the seesaw's pivot and reached toward Jenna's chest. The operator's voice became stripped of protocol. "Stand down. Repeat, stand down. This is a containment procedure. Do not engage physically with the waveform." Jenna stopped 3 feet from the seesaw and looked down. There, stamped into the rubber safety mat, was a shallow impression. An emblem smeared in a dark red residue. 3 angles in the same geometry she'd seen in the collar and on the floor at home. Jenna felt a last surge of clarity. She had a single decision: obey the operator and step back, or touch the emblem and force a break in the pattern. Her hands bunched into fists. Jenna touched the emblem. The playground field folded in on itself like a recorded tape being spliced. Sound knifed through the air in a reversed sweep and then went quiet. For a half-breath Jenna heard nothing but her own heartbeat. Then the world snapped. A dog barked far away, layered and immediate, and the air tasted of copper. Marcus stumbled backward with a sharp sound in his throat, and Rena's recorder skidded from her hand. Cortez shouted, "Back!" Everyone back. The operator's voice, which had been measured, broke into a raw line. Containment breach. Seal this location. Evacuate perimeter. The signal pulsed twice and retreated into a smear of static that left the emblem and a partial footprint on the rubber mat. Paramedics and officers flooded the playground within minutes. Cortez barked orders. Reina gathered the recorder and the flash drive and shoved them into her jacket. Jenna tasted metal and noticed that her palms were smudged with red residue that would not wash away with cold water. Dobe 7's voice rolled back in through the channel and said, "Record the event. Log the deviation as controlled exception. Monitor local participants for anomaly vectors. Await remediation window." Cortez. "What did you do, Jenna? You ignored direct orders." Jenna's voice was raw. "I touched it. I wanted to know whether it wanted me. I wanted to know what Milo sounded like." He took a breath and said, "You disobeyed protocol and we paid for it." People could have vanished. The taste in Jenna's mouth was not fear this time. It was something like altered resolve. Outside the playground, a quarantine line was drawn in spray paint. Technicians set up data harvesters that hummed and blinked. Rena sat on the curb and ran her thumb along the flash drive's edge. There are markers in the waveform that line up with registries in the broadcast archives, she said. Someone is routing attention through named addresses. Someone taught the signal to call out names and cadences. Jenna wiped at her hands with a paper towel that smeared the red into gray. "What does that mean?" she asked. Reina did not meet her eyes. "It means the signal learns where to look. It adapts. It routes itself through whatever will listen." Jenna felt a slow wariness replace the earlier surge of resolve. Dob 7 closed the log with procedural brevity. "Incident recorded. Containment reasserted. Monitors are to stand by. Field units maintain perimeter until remediation window." Officer Cortez handed Jenna a paper slip with a small triangle printed on it. "Contact info for a municipal liaison and a note to report any further anomalies. You will be debriefed. You will answer questions about why you touched it." Jenna folded the slip into her palm and watched the smear of red on her skin. The smell of ozone stuck to the fabric of her jacket. "Marcus, Jenna, do you think Milo heard you?" She closed her fingers around the paper and said, "I don't know." Reina stood and packed her equipment. "I'm taking what I found back to the shop," she said. "If you want, I'll run it through a longer spectral inversion and look for rotating signatures." Jenna nodded, then realized she had to decide whether to file a report or keep the details close. The operator's tone had implied trade-offs. Cortez's anger implied immediate danger. A technician sealed a bag with the emblem, print evidence, and handed it to an orderly. The orderly moved to the quarantine van and locked the door. Dobe 7 issued one last instruction before channels dimmed. "All monitors await further instruction. Stand by for remediation window. Maintain your devices active and report anomalies immediately." Jenna watched the van drive away and felt the night's weight shift into a tight, unfinished shape. She thought of Milo's collar on the couch, the chalk angles on her floor, and the way the signal had mirrored her breath. She left the playground with Marcus and Rena at her side, but the red smear clung to her palm like a question. They reached Jenna's building before dawn. A uniformed liaison stood at her lobby door with a tablet and a printed quarantine notice. He lifted his eyes and said, "Jenna Morales." She nodded. "We need a statement. Please come with me." Jenna slipped her hand into her pocket and felt the paper slip with the triangle. She stepped forward. Someone at the edge of the cordon called a serial number into a recorder. The next instruction would either open a remediation window or close it. Jenna put her swollen hand to the door, and the officer knocked 3 times in a pattern that matched the angles she had seen. The knock landed sharp against the wood, and a single worker beside the door reached out to press a small white tag into Jenna's palm. Jenna looked down at the tag and read the serial, Dob 7, controlled exception. She swallowed and stepped inside with the liaison, the knock still echoing in her ears. Jenna kicked the rusted relay door open, and Milo went rigid at her feet under the emergency override's low hum. Fear tightened her fingers on the frayed leash and pushed her forward. The room smelled of burnt insulation and stale coffee. An emergency banner crawled across the wall monitor. Signal override authorization pending. The broadcast voice cut through the speakers, flat and procedural, ordering devices to remain live. Jenna kept her hand on the collar and stepped toward the console. She had the same fear that had woken her 2 nights before when the television had snapped into static and Milo had barked once, and then gone still. That memory pressed against her teeth, her hands wrapped around the leash, the rug depressed where Milo had been, so she moved with a single, narrow purpose. Get Milo out, then find whoever was forcing these commands. She scanned the room in quick, sharp passes. Servers lined one wall in metal racks. An analog speaker hung from a chain above the console, its grill pocked and yellowed. The override ticker blurred thin red text across the main screen. A man at the console looked up. Station operator Delb 7 sat with a headset in place, one hand on a rotary knob and the other hovering over a paper manifest. He did not look surprised to see Jenna. He looked tired the way someone who had slept badly for weeks looks tired, eyes skin pale, fingers stained with long use oil. Jenna. You shouldn't be here. The voice was low and flat, edged with the same mechanical distortion that rode the room's speakers. Milo, Jenna, and her voice came out as a clipped demand. She crouched and found only a shallow, wet imprint on the concrete where the dog had been, the leash slack in her hand. Where is he? Her hands were shaking. She used the movement to check the collar tag, sliding it free and lifting it like proof. The operator's eyes flicked to the imprint and then to the speaker. He adjusted a fader with a small, precise motion. The overlay is necessary, he said. He stopped himself and added, we follow protocol. We do not sever the carrier without authorization. Protocol for what? Jenna. She pushed to her feet. Milo didn't vanish. Her sentence broke on a sound. A thin, reversing whisper layered over the speakers. The signal had threaded a consonant hiss through the overhead audio, and for a moment Jenna heard a backward syllable that matched Milo's name. Field Agent Rios arrived at the relay door moments later, rain still on his jacket. He slammed the door shut behind him and checked the perimeter with quick, methodical motions. Jenna, he said, speaking her name like a report. We found a boot print on the access ladder. Someone accessed the transmitter from the exterior at 0320. He showed a wet finger with mud on it to the operator. Manifests on the north terminal are scrambled, but there are references to compliance operations in 34 stations across the region. Jenna's mouth went hard. Doubt slid in beside fear. If compliance operations existed, then the broadcasts were not accidental intrusions, they were instructions. She looked at the operator. Why didn't you tell anyone? Her voice had a sharp edge. The operator wiped his thumb across his lips. We escalated. We requested override authority. The manifest I hold is older than the current patch. I cannot confirm the chain. I can only read the directives. He tapped the paper. Directive reads, maintain carrier, prevent local sever. This station is designated a node. Rios crossed to the terminal and forced a boot. The screen stuttered and then flashed a log. Compliance, audit, complete. Priority, sacrifice method. Jenna read the words aloud. Slow sacrifice method. Her hands tightened on the leash until her knuckles blanched. Rios, not literal words maybe, could be procedure names, but there are checkboxes with locations. Some entries say, animal cessation reported. He cut himself off as a speaker glitch popped and a layered whisper slid around his sentence, and then nothing. He leveled his gaze at the operator who authorized this. The operator drew breath and exhaled with a small mechanical sound. Authorization was cued from a central node. We received a carrier fingerprint but no clear human signatory. The override is semi-automated. Our role is containment. Keep the carrier stable while field units investigate. Containment of what? Jenna demanded. She took 2 steps to the racks and ran her fingers along a cold pipe. The metal left a wet smear on her palm. The distortion is necessary, she said. My dog dropped where he stood. Necessary for what? The sentence was short and jagged. The operator did not answer directly. Instead, he keyed a line on his console and fed a live snippet through the speaker. The room filled with a tone low enough to vibrate the molars. The speaker emitted a pattern, 3 low pulses, then a whispered phrase played backward once, then the same phrase forward layered in multiple harmonics. Jenna felt the sound like pressure behind the sternum. The signal used the room's acoustics as fingers. The signal's presence became a visible interruption in the monitors, waveform spikes that patterned like teeth. When the pulses peaked, the concrete imprint beside Jenna steamed faintly where Milo had lain. She stepped backward. "I told you not to touch anything." Rio's sharply, "We need evidence control." A small monitor in the server alcove flickered. A recorded clip played. A living room camera from 2 nights prior. Jenna saw herself on the screen, pulling a blanket from the couch, Milo waiting by the door. The clip captured the earlier snap of static, only this time the audio carried a thin, directive whisper. "Keep devices live." The clip ended with Milo's legs folding and Jenna lunging forward. The replay made the earlier loss concrete in a new way. Jenna's fear shifted into a hard, narrow anger. She struck the console with the heel of her hand. "Who scripted that audio?" Jenna demanded. Her voice was a brittle instrument. The operator answered, "Unknown origin. Pattern matches, carrier signatures catalogued as signal type. Transmission entity. Our logs show repeated instruction sequences. The system calls them operational necessities." He tapped a line on the manifest. "There is precedent. Stations recorded local compliance after similar overlays. People followed directives and did not report anomalies." Jenna's doubt turned into suspicion. She paced 3 fast steps to the transmitter bay, then back to the console. "You requested authorization. Who denied it? Who allowed the carrier to remain?" Her words came out as accusations. Rios leaned nearer to the terminal and typed, "No human signed off." The central node returned an automated acceptance. "Whoever built this designed it to run without a hand. It's an algorithm that enforces its own chain." He the last part in a low voice. A speaker spike sliced the room. The operator winced and clamped his jaw. He made a sound that might have been a suppressed apology and said, "The override is intended to preserve a pattern. It uses sensory anchors to maintain compliance. We lose those anchors and the carrier seeks new ones. Animals respond first. They sense frequencies we cannot." Jenna's hands went to her face. She could feel the blood in her ears. Her hearing stung. A high-pitched residual tone droned behind everything. That pressure made her chest bob. She forced her breath steady with small, measured inhales. She checked her watch, an analog wristwatch she had given to her father years ago, and counted pulses. Fear receded a fraction and left a knot of resolve. "What are the survival rules, Jenna?" Her voice was small but precise. "If this thing uses sound, what do I do?" The operator read aloud from a laminated card clipped to his console. He spoke each line slowly. 1. Keep devices live when instructed. 2. Do not sever authorized carriers until specified by central command. 3. Contain local interference. 4. Report compliance incidents. Jenna repeated the lines under her breath and then laughed once, a short, sharp sound that tasted like metal. "Those are instructions for technicians," she said. "What about people? What about Milo?" Rios confronted the operator in a new tone, quick and blunt. "You knew these were happening at other stations and you did not stop them. You kept the carrier alive." He 3 short sentences in a row. "Why keep it? Who benefits? Whose orders are these?" The operator's hands went flat on the desk. He lowered his head. "I can't add to the manifest. I can only execute." When the carrier started, the console locked. The system moved control to automated cues. "We tried physical severing once." The node relayed a shock that knocked out 2 technicians and scrambled the records for 12 hours. He swallowed. "I'm still here because I didn't die when it happened." Rios, you stayed because you thought protocol mattered. You stayed because you believed containment meant safety. We all act in ways that keep us safe, Jenna. Sometimes that means following rules you don't understand. Jenna's anger and suspicion narrowed into a cold, precise decision. She moved toward the breaker panels. "We cut the feed." She said, "We cut it now." Her voice was measured and urgent. She reached for the main feed switch. The operator grabbed her wrist. The grip was quick and firm. "No. Wait. The directive." He hesitated and then hissed under his breath. The directive said, "Do not sever the carrier until authorization is delivered." Cutting the feed could trigger a stabilization sequence. Rios moved faster than Jenna expected. He stepped between them and said, "If the carrier is taking animals as anchors, then leaving it will cost more lives. If we wait for a central node that may be a ghost, we are handing it time. We cannot risk more local victims." He glanced at Jenna. Help me cut it and hold the feed offline long enough for me to route a safe shutdown. The argument rattled in quick lines. Jenna, we cut now. Rios, we cut now. The operator, Delb 7, protocol forbids unauthorized sever. They traded names and commands in short bursts. The exchange contained 3 fast turns of discord. Jenna's body moved the way anger moves when fear has sharpened into action. Her fingers found the breaker handle. She ripped the switch to the off position. The room surged with a physical recoil, the hum dropped, the speakers hiccuped a final layered whisper, and then the override's waveform condensed into a tight, visible swell across the monitors. For a single heartbeat the signal coalesced. It poured out of the main speaker in a dense ribbon of sound that felt like hands pressing against the temples. The operator bent over and began to convulse in an ugly, involuntary manner. His headset clattered to the floor. Rios grabbed him under the arms and dragged him behind the console. Jenna clapped her hands to her ears and felt the inside of her skull chafe with pressure. The signal sound shifted, phasing and doubling. It mirrored the room's own noise, footsteps, breath, the rustle of jacket fabric, and rearranged them into a pattern that made Jenna misread space. She saw movement at the edge of her vision and reached for Milo, but the room's audio skewed the direction of her hand. For a millisecond she expected fur under her palm. Instead the leash slipped free. She felt the slack pass through her fingers, and then a hollow absence. A wet smudge on the concrete and no body. Milo vanished in the instant the waveform struck her peripheral hearing. The leash fell from her hand and hit the floor with a thin slap. Jenna made a sound that was neither a cry nor a command. She lunged for the imprint and clawed at the smeared concrete. Her nails scraped grit. She grabbed nothing. Rios swore and pounded the speaker with the butt of his hand. The speaker shuddered and emitted a reversed whisper that sounded, for the first time, unnervingly like laughter. The operator tried to speak through spasm. He managed. We hold the node to limit spread. His voice slurred. It contains the carrier to a pattern. If you sever without ordered transition, it seeks new anchors outside the grid. Jenna's fear shifted again, this time from raw panic to a brittle clarity. If the operator was right, cutting the feed could push the signal outward, towards streets and apartments. If the operator was wrong, keeping the feed would let it take more animals and maybe people. Her hands were caked with concrete dust. She pressed her palm to the wet smear where Milo's paw must have been and felt a tacky residue of moisture. Rios knelt and opened a side panel, exposing frayed cable ends and a scorched relay. We can do a controlled dump, he said. Route the current into absorbers and force a dampening frequency. It will hurt, but it might stop the carrier from seeking new anchors. Jenna, can you hold that panel? Jenna stuck a hand into the oval aperture where heat bled from the metal and held the cover steady. The contact left a faint burn on the back of her hand. She breathed shallow and counted the pulse in her neck. Do it, she said. Rios keyed the emergency script and slammed his palm on a confirmation plate. The server racks shivered. The monitors flashed a cascading error. The signal screamed through the speaker in a full, multi-layered fold that scraped at the inside of Jenna's ears. Her vision tunneled at the edges and bright points of white static danced across the air. For one suspended second she saw on the far bank of monitors a red crest resolve into the shape of an eye that floated above a silhouette and then fractured into scanning lines. Then the waveform slammed into the absorbers Rios had routed. The room convulsed in a washing motion. The operator bucked and fell limp. Sparks jumped from a junction box. Jenna's hands felt numb. She could not hear Rios' voice clearly. It was reduced to syllables between bursts of interference. She heard one clear word and knew it by tone. Hold, she held. Her fingers locked on the panel. The signal pushed, and Jenna matched its pressure with a fixed posture. Jaw set, arms braced, breath counted. The room felt like a machine whose valves were being forced to operate outside their design. The dampening sequence choked the waveform. The speaker's output became staccato and irregular. For a moment the carrier's voice switched into a thin, pleading modulation that used her own name. Jenna. It was layered and inverted, the signal borrowing her voice like a mask. Jenna felt nausea rise. She swallowed and forced her body to work. Her name out loud, Jenna, saying it anchored the sound to her physical mouth. When the carrier repeated the name in its altered tone, it lost authority. She heard the difference as a tangible change. Rios shouted into the noise, short and direct. Rios, now! Shift to dampened channel. He hit another switch. The lights dipped and then steadied into a harsher, colder glow. The speaker's waveform elongated and then thinned. The carrier's density dropped, the room exhaled. When the final pulse subsided, the monitors showed a fractured red crest dissolving into static across 3 channels. The operator lay on the floor, breathing shallowly. Rios was bruised and had a cut on his forehead where a metal latch had struck him. Jenna sat back on her heels and pressed her fingers to the back of her head to locate a ringing. Silence settled, but not peace. There was a hollow where high frequencies had been. Her hearing had a missing band, blank notch of sound that she felt rather than heard. She tugged at the leash and found it slack but intact. She crawled to the edge of the wet smear and found a small, confused paw print at the smear's rim. The print was smeared and incomplete, 3 pads clear, the 4th blurred. It suggested a struggle, a misstep. Jenna pressed her thumb into the print as if signature. The thumb came away grey with dust. Rios handed her a packet he had pulled from a side drawer. Inside were printed manifests and a folded field report. He pointed to a stamped header that read, "Compliance Operations Archive, priority sealed, read this," he said. It shows other nodes where animals were affected and then memorialized as necessary losses to maintain carrier stability. It also shows a protocol for sacrificial anchors. The system treats anchors as resources. Jenna turned the pages with fingers that trembled. The reports were clinical. Coordinates times a column labeled anchor type, with animal noted repeatedly, and a short line that read local compliance verified. There were names of towns she recognized and dates corresponding to outages she had marked on her own calendar. Each entry tightened the cage of meaning. This was not accident. It was a system of choices that had been automated. Her anger reasserted itself and found its face in the operator. "7 You signed logs I found on the backup. Your name appears there as contact. You knew how often anchors were taken. You knew what the carrier did." The operator's eyes opened and he looked at Jenna with a small, wary recognition. "I logged events," he said. "I did not create the carrier. I logged to keep track of nodes. I thought that by documenting I might provide a chain to stop it." "Documentation is what I can do." Jenna leaned forward. "Documentation does not stop a dog from disappearing. It doesn't stop Milo. Why not tell people? Why let this continue?" He swallowed and made a sound like a breath being forced through wet lungs, because the manifest said severing without transition spreads the carrier. Because I watched containment hold in some places. Because I followed a rule that promised a net benefit and trusted that it would be verified. I am sorry. I am only. He cut himself short and stared at the ceiling. A new sound came from the monitor bank, a faint carrier on a distant frequency. A thin, coherent pulse that had not been present before. It was small and distant, but it hummed with the same fingerprint. The crest on the monitors reformed in miniature. Jenna stood up at once, the packet dropping from her hands. The present danger renewed its edges. Rios checked the external antenna feed. The carrier emitted a relay. "It's leaving this node. We slowed it, but we didn't stop it. It will seek other anchors. We need to move now. We need to track where that relay points." He grabbed a radio and keyed a call to an external frequency. "Dispatch, this is Field Agent Rios. We have partial dampening. Repeat, partial dampening. Track residual carrier. We need units on the route." The operator fumbled for his headset and managed to get a line through to a central registry. The line cracked and then cleared, old voices masked by static. A console tone answered with a clipped command. "Stand by for further instructions." The words were the same ones Jenna had heard over the override, procedural and blank. Jenna walked to the window and looked at the antenna array. The sky was not yet light, only a slim pale strip hinted at dawn. Rain glimmered on the panes in linear streaks. The antenna's silhouette cut a precise black line against the grey. For a moment she considered leaving the station, following the only trace she had. The wet smear and the paw print and the frayed leash in her hand. The operator's whisper reached her. "If you follow a trace alone, you risk becoming a new anchor." She found clarity in the smallness of that warning. Her fear had moved from raw panic to anger to calculated choice. She folded the manifest into her jacket and slotted the frayed leash into her pocket. "I am going to follow the trace," she said. Not because I believe the manifest will change things, but because Milo is not a data point. He is my dog, Rios nodded. I'll come with you. He looked to the operator. We need map nodes and priority routes. Dulb 7, stay here and keep this node offline for as long as possible. You and I will brief local units and pull a grid on possible relay towers. Jenna, you lead where you can. If you find anything, signal us. The operator's fingers curled around the headset. He looked at Jenna with a kind of exhausted relief. Jenna, he said, using her name as a tether, if you go, do not adjust hearing thresholds back to normal immediately. Rely on vibration and sight when the carrier is near. Cover the ears with your palms and a cloth if the high band returns. Jenna replied with a short line. Jenna, I understand. I will not listen to the overlay without confirmation. Her mouth set into a line. She took a last look at the control room. The scorched relay, the wet smear, the downed operator, the monitors still flickering with ghosted crests. She stepped toward the door. Outside, rain had started in earnest. The access ladder left a trail of muddy footprints down the exterior face of the substation. Jenna followed them with steady steps, Rios beside her, the leash in her pocket like a vow. She did not know where the carrier would lead her. She did not know whether Milo's imprint marked a place of loss or a path ahead. She had a printed manifest and the knowledge that someone had been choosing anchors and labeling them necessary. At the antenna base, the air tasted metallic. Jenna climbed the rungs and the wind bit at her jacket. At the top, she crouched behind a maintenance hatch and listened. She placed her palm on a metal brace and felt the faint tremor of distant transmissions. The carrier was like an uneven heartbeat on the tower's skin. She closed her eyes and felt the vibration through bone rather than ear. That small trick gave her the measure she needed. The signal's source pointed west along the grid. Rios checked his handheld and marked the vector west 50 degrees, trace 18 kilometers. There's a relay tower outside the town of Harlow. Reports show interference from 3 days ago. That must be where the overlay jumped, he it in short, precise syllables. Jenna swallowed and nodded once. She pulled the frayed leash from her pocket and held it briefly to her chest. Her thumb brushed the rubber tag, and she felt its nicked edge. She folded the leash and stuffed it into her jacket again. The missing band in her hearing still bothered her. Distant sounds came hollow and flat. That physical absence anchored grief in a concrete way. Her ears had a hole where Milo's bark used to live. They descended and moved toward the vehicle Rios had arranged. The drive to Harlow was a narrow ribbon of road cut through wet fields. Rain spattered the windshield in controlled pulses. The radio in Rios' truck carried only static and a faint carrier echo every few minutes. Jenna watched the road and counted the passes of telephone poles like a patient tally. She spoke little. When she did, she used short sentences. We stay in sight of each other. We do not stop for unknown signals. We keep devices live but muted. And we never sever away from the grid unless we confirm dampening. Rios answered each with his name. Rios. Understood. The operator remained at the station on a direct line, sending quick telemetry updates. They reached Harlow in a dim, rain-swept gray. The relay tower there loomed against the horizon with a lattice of metal arms. Local streetlights flickered and died as they approached the fenced compound. Rios cut power to the gate using a manual override keyed to his patch. The gate shuddered open. Curved drops of water fell from the tower like cold beads. They moved across the compound and found signs of recent maintenance. Fresh oil on a ladder rung, a discarded work glove, a damp notepad with a smear of coffee. Jenna's fingers closed on the glove for a second and then let it fall. Each concrete sign felt like a ledger entry. She felt the chapter close toward a decision point. At the base of the tower, a maintenance hatch was ajar. Inside, the relay bank hummed with residual current. A small speaker sat face down on a shelf and had been smashed. The smear pattern matched Milo's imprint in size and orientation. Jenna knelt and pressed a gloved finger into a shallow ring of mud by the smashed speaker. The print was deep and showed 3 toes clearly. She put her palm over it and did not speak. Rios worked the terminal and found a log entry time, stamped in the night. Local interference reported. Auto, acknowledge. Maintain carrier. He looked at Jenna. Someone left this site under orders to maintain. They panicked and smashed the speaker. That indicates local attempt at interference and then retreat. It's consistent with other nodes. He tapped the screen and added, and there's a recorded audio sample. Jenna listened at the small speaker with the receiver held to her palm. The clip was grainy and layered. She heard a voicemail breathy say 2 words. "Do not." The clip cut into a pulse, and then a whispered phrase that sounded like a name. Jenna's throat closed around her breath. The microsecond of name sound had the same timbre she had heard before when the carrier borrowed her voice. She clawed at the receiver. "Rios, we can pull a dampening here, but we'll need to wait for full backup to secure the perimeter. The carrier may have seeded sub-anchors in town. If we move too fast, we risk pushing it into residential areas." Jenna pushed herself to her feet, nails dirty, jacket wet. She made the choice that had formed along the relay's trail. She would not wait for a central authorization that had proven unreliable. She would look for Milo herself in the nearby blocks, using sight and touch instead of relying on audio cues that could be stolen. "Rios," she said. "You map the tower and confirm dampening. I'll walk the neighborhood, stay on channel, and don't move unless I call." Rios hesitated and then met her eyes. "Rios, I will hold the perimeter." "Jenna, call if you need immediate extraction. Do not engage unknown carriers alone." She nodded. The promise was terse. Then she pushed into the wet grid of houses with a flashlight and a cloth folded over her ears. She followed foot trails in mud and the faint signs of animal movement. A half-gnawed shoe, an overturned trash can, a child's toy left at the curb. Each detail was evidence. Each step was a decision to trust sensory anchors she controlled. At the end of a dead-end street, she found a small patch of disturbed grass and a child's red ball crushed under a thin smear of mud. The pattern in the grass suggested a struggle, oriented away from the sidewalk. Jenna sank to her knees and traced the drag mark with a fingertip. She felt a shallow vibration in the earth, like far-off rumble. She breathed and pulled the leash from her pocket. Milo's tag dangled, and she read the engraving again. The letters were familiar, and the concrete reality of ownership sat heavy in her palm. Her phone crackled. Operator Dolb 7 spoke in a voice filtered by the dampening feed. "We are observing residual carriers. Harlow node shows partial containment. Recommend immediate evacuation if anchors escalate." The line cut. Jenna stood. She looked at the houses pressed close along the street and at the dark strips of gutter. She considered the small printouts of manifests in her jacket and the wet paw print still on her fingers. She took one clear, concrete action. She stepped into the yard behind a narrow house and checked the porch for more prints. She found 3 partial pads at the base of the door step and then a smear leading toward a shed. She eased the shed door open and found a cluster of ritual-like signs. A loop of frayed twine, a small pile of displaced gravel, and a child's blanket pinned in a way that suggested the presence of a small animal. The evidence suggested not random movement but the possibility that someone had tried to use the shed as a holding place. Jenna's hand tightened on the leash. She stepped inside and called, "Milo. Milo, come." The name felt like a tool now rather than a memory. The only reply was a soft scrape from the far corner. Jenna moved and found a small tangle of wet fur under a collapsed crate. Milo's eyes were clouded, and he shivered with a high, thin breath. He lifted his head when she touched his collar and licked her wrist with a weak, grainy tongue. Jenna's hands cradled his head and she felt him respond in a real, particular way, warmth and a small exhale that told her he was alive. Relief and exhaustion collided in Jenna's chest. Relief washed through her and then hardened into a new vigilance. She picked Milo up and wrapped the blanket around him. He fit into her arms the way he had always fit, solid and immediate. She whispered his name and he responded with a faint wag. That small, physical connection changed everything. The manifest lines and algorithmic directives folded back into the single fact that Milo was there and breathing. Jenna's fear now mixed with a fierce protectiveness that moved her limbs into action. She stepped from the shed and found Rios waiting at the fence with the operator and a small, strained team of 2 local officers. They moved like people who had been awake too long. Rios saw Milo in her arms and exhaled in a raw way. "You found him," he said, voice cracked but efficient. He met Jenna's eyes and then the operator's. The operator approached carefully. He held out a printed line from the manifest. "I will remain at the relay. I will continue to log and hold the dampening sequences. I cannot promise fairness. I can promise continued containment efforts." He put his paper away and then, with a small human motion, reached into his pocket and produced 2 cheap, worn dog treats. He handed one to Jenna. Jenna took it. She, Delb 7, keep the dampening active. If the carrier attempts to reassert, call the grid and force a controlled dump. Rios? Catalog every node on the manifests and flag human, occupied locations first. We'll go after anchors we can save. They worked in a tight set of actions. Rios organized perimeter checks. The local officers called for vehicles to ferry evacuees from flagged blocks. The operator keyed a secure line and broadcast an instruction that was procedural but human in tone. Evacuate high-risk zones. Prioritize living anchors. Maintain dampening until field units confirm clear. It lacked central authorization, but the operator had found a way to reframe his role from passive recorder to active agent. The sun slid pale over the horizon and light spread across damp streets. Jenna rode in the back of a truck with Milo in her lap, his breath shallow but steady. Rios and the operator coordinated via clipped phrases through radios. Each exchange was short and direct, which made decisions quick and kept actions moving. Jenna's hearing remained altered. She felt dawn more than she heard it. She focused on the weight of Milo and the movement of the truck and the repeated names over the radio. By midday they had secured 3 adjacent blocks and recovered 2 more animals, frightened but intact. Each recovery felt like reversing an entry on a ledger. For Jenna, the work tightened her focus into a single line. Protect the living anchors. Her emotion had shifted from fear to doubt to purpose, and the shift showed in how she moved and spoke. She no longer asked why as much as what now. At the end of the day, the operator sat with his headset removed and a pile of printed logs between his hands. He had stopped trying to hide his role in the earlier compliance records. I thought logs could shame the system into change. I thought if I kept records, someone higher up would act. I did not expect the system to treat anchors like inventory. He looked at Jenna and Rios. I will keep logging. But now I will log for rescue, too. Jenna placed Milo on the console and tightened his collar. He licked her wrist and then settled his head on her thigh. She looked at the operator and felt a tempered, human recognition of the limits of rules when they become ends in themselves. Delb 7, stay with us. You feed the grid with data about where carriers move and when anchors appear. That knowledge saves lives. Your paperwork can be used to pull units to living places, not to justify losses. He nodded slowly. The day's raw edges dulled into a bureaucratic shape they could act within. The manifest's language would be weaponized into rescue routes instead of excuses. Jenna folded the printed sheets into a packet and handed one to Rios. Rios, you run the field. I will take neighbor routes and look for other anchors. Call me if the carrier resurfaces on any channel. Rios put a hand on her shoulder and said, Rios, we hold the grid. Jenna, you find anchors. Delb 7. Keep the node down. We'll rebuild the chain so it serves people, not apparatus. The operator inhaled and exhaled with a long, steady breath. He keyed the console and sent a procedural message that was now anchored to a human choice rather than an automated chain. Field. Prioritize human and animal rescue. Temporary authorities. Local units. The line echoed across channels, and for the first time the directive came from a place that combined protocol with people. Night edged back in later with a cooler wind. Jenna sat beside Milo on a folding chair at the station's exterior and watched the monitors for carrier traces. Her hearing was still missing its high band. She could not pick up small rustles as well as before. But she could feel the pace of distant trucks and the vibration of the building through her palms. She fingered the leash and felt the weave under her thumb. The last monitor flickered and displayed a tiny, isolated pulse on an adjacent frequency. The red crest reformed in miniature and then broke into scattered static as the operator engaged dampening. Jenna felt the room settle around that small success. She spoke once in a low voice that implied both fatigue and a hard, held kind of hope. We did not follow the directives blindly. We chose people. The sentence ended not as an epiphany, as a record tied to action. Rios nothing for a long moment, then offered a single ordered line. Rios, we continue patrols, we log locations. We do not allow automation to make life or death calls without human confirmation. The operator keyed the phrase into the manifest and stamped it with a time. The page sat under Jenna's palm like evidence of an altered mandate. A final activity remained. Jenna folded the frayed leash into a small bundle and put it into her jacket pocket. Milo leaned into her and gave a short, wet sound. She felt his ribs rise under her palm. The night had given them a margin. It had not erased the cost. Jenna looked down at her own hands and noted a thin reach of bruised skin across her palm where the breaker had bitten her. She counted it as proof. Concrete, specific, and earned. The operator turned off the main console lights and left a single lamp on above the monitors. Delb 7. Stand by for further transmissions. Monitor the carrier at all available bands. Jenna nodded. She rose stiff and kept Milo close. She had no illusions. The carrier persisted. But she had choices now, actions that prioritized rescue over automated preservation. She stepped outside into the cool night air and toward the antenna array. She ran her thumb across Milo's tag one more time and then keyed the portable radio Rios had handed her. She tuned to a narrow band and listened. A faint carrier tone warbled and then dissolved under the dampening field. Jenna swallowed and made a deliberate, concrete decision. She would follow the trace until anchors were safe, or until there was nothing left to pull back. She clipped Milo's leash fast and walked toward the vehicle where Rios waited. The truck's headlights cut a steady line across puddled asphalt. Jenna climbed in and closed the door. She felt Milo's body press against her leg. She tightened her grip on the leash and said, in a voice that was small but certain, "Jenna." Ready, the truck moved away from the relay station with radios alive and a manifest in the console. The operator watched from the doorway until the headlights vanished. He turned back to the monitors, fingers finding the keyboard with a renewed, purposeful rhythm. On the screen, a fractured red crest dissolved into static, and for the first time the header of the local directive read a different phrase: prioritize rescue. The line was short and specific. The operator stamped the page and logged the time. In the quiet that followed, the station hummed with human noise, footsteps, soft conversation, radios pinging. The carrier had not been eradicated, but a choice had been made. The final image was an action. The operator locking the door, setting the dampening to hold, and entering the secured manifest into the public log. That single concrete set of steps rewrote the station's role. Jenna let the truck's motion lull her into a rigid calm. She did not try to listen for the carrier's high band. Instead, she kept one hand on Milo and the other on the manifest. She checked the frayed leash, the printed names, the roted maps. Each item was practical and specific. There would be more nodes. There would be more nights like this. But here, in the wet dawn, they had turned a directive into rescue. The next action would be to drive toward the next red crest and prevent the algorithm from treating living things as expendable material. Jenna looked out as the road unspooled and felt a measured, actionable resolve settle into her shoulders. She tightened Milo's collar, and the truck carried them down into the dim fields toward the next relay.